Hi, everyone. I am re-recording the first part of the Tree Task Force meeting number 3 for the Lake Oswego Tree Regulation Amendment Project that occurred yesterday, October 22nd at 9 a.m. There was an error with the recording, so I'm just re-recording the beginning of the meeting where I was mainly presenting information. At the beginning of the meeting, we took a poll of the Tree Task Force members to accept last meeting's meeting minutes. And the results of that poll can be found in the meeting minutes for this meeting that will be published on the website. So most of the meeting will be spent digging into critical parts of the code and the 4 potential code concepts that were in the memo included in the meeting packet. There will be several opportunities to ask questions after the first 2 agenda items, so I'm asking Tree Task Force members to hold off on any questions for now because I may answer them shortly. So the objectives for the meeting today are to understand what a clear and objective standard is, to review what the project team heard at the last Tree Task Force meeting and how that informed today's content and agenda, to learn about the code concepts in the memo and how they are different than the existing code, to provide you all an opportunity to ask technical questions to the consulting arborist, Christine Johnson, and to get your specific input on the concepts in order to direct us in moving forward with the project. We will administer several polls after discussions as a temperature check so that we can inform the City Council and the Planning Commission what you're all currently thinking when we bring these concepts to them in November and December. These critical parts of the code need to be discussed today because they're really meaty and will affect how we approach the rest of the substantive key issues. The parts of the code that we are discussing today impact a specific subset of type 2 tree removal applications, but not all tree removals. The remaining 8 substantive key issues and the 25 technical key issues identified in several of our previous memos will be addressed as we move through the project. But by beginning with the most challenging items first, it allows us to create a framework for these other issues since all of these regulatory items are pretty interconnected. So I have the task force charge statement here on the screen to remind us of the Tree Task Force's role in reviewing these code concepts. And to remind you all that we're looking for input if these code concepts enhance the long-term sustainability of Lake Oswego's urban forest, and if they are clear and objective when related to meeting housing development. It's important to note that most of this code is not changing, and that we're going in and doing tweaks per the Urban Community Forest Plan. Lake Oswego's tree code is working well and has maintained a 50% tree canopy. So the scope of this project is not to do a full revamp of the code. It is to go in and make surgical edits and changes to comply with state law. On previous meetings, we heard questions raised about clear and objective standards. So I wanted to take a moment to review this concept with you and how it affects this project. So this is the Oregon State statute, which requires all cities in Oregon to adopt and apply clear and objective standards, conditions, and procedures regulating residential development to ensure that the city does not use discretionary or subjective criteria to deny residential projects or discourage housing through unreasonable cost or delay, which is really expensive to developers. This term, needed housing, used here is defined in a separate part of the code, but essentially it covers missing middle housing to address the state of emergency of housing in Oregon. Lake Oswego is required by state law to make the clear and objective standards around housing development in the code to reduce expensive procedural time and process time. This means changes to a subset of type 2 applications related to development, but again, not all tree removals. So how do clear and objective standards play out in tree code? A discretionary standard is subjective and requires interpretation by both the reviewer and the applicant. The example on the left is from Lake Oswego's current code, and it states that the removal of a tree will not have a significant impact on the character or aesthetics of a neighborhood. A clear and objective standard has a specific measurement and specific details, which means that by right, if somebody does the things listed in this standard, a permit can be administered and they can continue without delay. Cities are required to offer at least one clear and objective track, although there can also be discretionary tracks as other options as well in the code. And does anyone have any questions about clear and objective standards? When we reviewed the best practices and alternative approaches with the tree task force at the last meeting, there were some clear areas where people raised a lot of comments and questions, and it felt like we needed to spend a bit more time diving deeper into these 4 key substantive issues. This is why we wanted to bring you code concepts today so that we can get your feedback on issues that have big policy shifts up front and center before the draft code stage. So last meeting, we went through all 12 substantive key issues, but these 4 really stuck out because there was a lot of discussion around them and they have big policy implications related specifically to needed housing. For clear and objective standards for needed housing, there was discussion around whether tree retention should be measured by a percentage of total trees or a percentage of DBH, and what those percentages should be. For creating tree preservation incentives, there was some positive feedback on incentives for design standard adjustments and reduced mitigation fees and/or reduced mitigation plantings. For the appeals process and evaluating it to reduce delays and conflicts between groups, there was positive feedback on the idea of a hearings officer reviewing all appeals, but some folks were concerned about eliminating public notice entirely. And for consistency between development and non-development tree permits, there was discussion about how there should be more similarities in the processes and that there need to be options for homeowners to remove trees that are hazardous but don't quite meet that criteria. Code concepts were developed for these 4 key issues, but I wanted to lay out what a code concept is first and why it isn't the same thing as draft code, which will come up soon in the project. A code concept is what it sounds like. It's a concept. It's not set in stone. It's developed as a tool to encourage reactions and discussion. And these concepts were created after we discussed the alternative approach ideas the last meeting. When the content of that discussion made the team realize that we needed to get some more imagined and fleshed out language in front of the tree task force for clarity. And these concepts that we're presenting today and in the memo explore how to turn alternative approaches into ideas that address the key issues, showing the options and the trade-offs that we need to consider before moving forward with draft code amendments. So code concepts are a preliminary stage, meaning that nothing has been decided and that a lot of further refinement will occur before the code language is drafted. Are there any questions about code concepts and what they are? The discussion around each of these 4 issues and their code concepts will be structured the same. I will give an overview of the existing code and compare it to the alternative code concept. We will then have a few minutes to ask questions and discuss each concept, and then do a quick poll to gauge the level of the support that the tree task force has right now so that we can pass that on with our discussion notes to the council and the planning commission. But before we jump in, I'll have the consulting arborist, Christine Johnson, introduce herself. She will be available to answer any questions about the existing code or code concepts, along with the rest of the project team. Kicking it off with the first key issue, creating clear and objective standards for residential uses. Today, if a site were being developed for housing and there was existing trees on the site, the process would be that a developer would apply for a type 2 tree cutting permit. And the city would determine if they could or couldn't remove the tree based on the existing discretionary code shown on the left here. That tree removal should not have a significant negative impact on erosion, soil stability, flow of surface waters, existing windbreaks, protection of adjacent trees, or the character and aesthetics of a neighborhood. Many trees are removed under this today, but it does take longer and it's more expensive for developers than if this standard was clear and objective. The alternative on the right here is the code concept that provides 2 options that the applicant can choose from: to retain a total percentage of trees on the lot, or to retain a total percentage of DBH on the lot. So right here, we have 50% as a placeholder. The percentages in this memo throughout are all placeholders and will continue to be reviewed and tweaked through the remaining project process. So don't get too hung up on the numbers here. This code concept also provides exemptions for trees in the building envelope, which was suggested at a previous task force meeting. So this code concept suggests and proposes exemptions for trees within the building envelope for small lots. So for lots that are 5,000 square feet or less, or lots no larger than 15% of the minimum lot size required in that zone. This is the diagram and example site from the memo, and it shows how one site could have two different potential outcomes with this alternative concept. A second part of the alternative concept is laid out here. So currently, if a tree removal meets the criteria for issuance of type 2 tree cutting permits, but is determined a significant tree, it cannot be removed under type 2 permits. Significant trees, the term is not clear and objective. So now all trees need to be categorized together under type 2 permits. In the past, native trees are more frequently considered significant trees, but now that would be going away. So currently, if the tree is significant, it can still be removed if it qualifies for one of two exemptions. If there is inevitable damage to the damage by the tree to structures, infrastructure, or utilities, or two, if an arborist does an alternatives analysis and deems that there aren't any alternatives to removal, like maintenance or pruning. Native trees aren't provided any benefits or incentives for being kept on properties with these exemptions. The alternative concept cuts out the alternatives analysis by an arborist, which can take a lot of time, and routes the applicant back to the percentage standards that we just discussed to determine if removal is okay. Instead of having the significant tree category that includes a lot of native trees, like anecdotally, the alternative concept provides a bonus credit for native trees at 125% DBH credit of the tree. So you can see here, the Oregon white oak is 20 inches DBH, and it goes 125% to 25%, 25-inch DBH credit. And now some time for questions, if anyone has any for Christine, the consulting arborist, to help with the discussion questions on the right, and to determine if these changes enhance the long-term sustainability of Lake Oswego's urban forest, and if they are clear and objective when related to needed housing. On to the second key issue, creating tree preservation incentives. Currently, developers can go through the variance process to receive a 50% building setback reduction. But they typically don't do this because they don't want to incur the costs that it takes for the variance application. This isn't necessarily going away. This will still remain an option likely, but the alternative concept puts forth the idea of another option for developers who retain 50% or more of trees on the lot, or 50% or more DBH, depending on the decision for the clear and objective standard that we just discussed earlier. They could still apply for the variance as well, but this would exempt them from the benefits of the new concept. They couldn't do both. And so eliminating the appeals process would have an impact on the cost of housing since it reduces the process time for developers preserving many trees. And this is the appeals process associated with the variance.
to apply for an somebody will have to apply for an actual variance through a land use process. So it takes several months to go through that process, and it allows up to a 50% building setback reduction. So for instance, if you have a rear yard setback of 30 feet, you could potentially reduce that rear yard setback to 15 feet if the purpose of it is to preserve a tree. And there's other criteria that you have to meet, but that's the basics of it. But again, you have to go through a process, which most developers or builders don't want to do because that adds a lot of time and process to the building the housing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, so my only, am I muted? No. My recommendation would be when looking at okay, so if the original incentive is for dimensional standards only, setback, building height, planes, I get that. But I think from a builder's perspective, those those don't matter nearly as much as say lot coverage or allowable building area that has an actual value to it. Dimensional standards help just kind of moving the building around a little bit, especially with building heights. But really, there's a value equation, and the value incentive happens more with lot coverage and allowable building areas. That would get people's attention or builders' attention more than just reduction in setbacks. Additionally, I think if you could eliminate the actual land use part of it, and maybe you already said that, I wasn't quite tracking. If you could eliminate the land use part of it, make it more of a prescriptive type of incentive, then I think that you'll see a lot more participation from builders and land developers.
And Rob, I would just add that giving more lot coverage is sort of counter to tree preservation because that allows you to build on more of the lot, which then could have a greater impact on the trees. So I think that's one of the reasons we didn't include it.
No, I understand that. I understand that that was an example that we look at for value more than, say, a setback. However, I think that there could be an argument to be made about that if you do allow more, allow slightly more lot coverage, then if that's going to keep more trees on the site, then I mean, I think everybody wins, don't they? So anyway, that's kind of my perspective. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Brandon, and then Jeff, and then we're going to move on to the poll.
This is 50% of the total trees or the total diameter. It's just kind of 50% so we have an idea.
I believe this would be the 50% of either, if that first concept was put into code. It would be whatever.
I'd be interested in like exploring like individual tree preservation options. Like if a tree is over 40 inches or of a certain species and over a certain size, then maybe the developer could get additional preservation incentives or incentives.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Jeff?
I think the goal is to kind of take the burden off of contractors and developers so it's easier to develop. So any way you can incentivize in the code that allows them more buildable square footage makes a lot more sense to me. And I think that's what the speaker before was trying to get at is the heights and the setback doesn't matter, but if you can add another 250 feet to your house, that makes more value for them. It makes it more worthwhile. And it doesn't really make any difference if it's on a 2,500 square foot lot or a 10,000 square foot lot. So I think to me that would make more sense.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm remembering back to we did a stakeholder focus group with developers. And so the dimensional standard adjustments that we are suggesting here based off of that conversation. And I think that this could just definitely be some, differences in experiences or, maybe different areas of Lake Oswego that you work in. But we did hear in this focus group that developers found that building height and like wall painting adjustments would be really helpful for them to accomplish more square feet in their house. It would allow them to have a full floor more. So it would increase the square footage. And that was just like an anecdotal, opinion-based conversation that we had with developers. But some of them said, if they were allowed 15%, 25% more building height, they would be able to put a third floor in on the house, which would dramatically increase the square footage. And there were some wall painting. I'm not a developer, I'm not a construction person, but some wall painting standards as well that, if expanded a bit, they could also use materials that would enable them to have more square footage in the house. And yeah, Pauline, I'll allow you to follow up on that since Pauline here is the design standard expert.
Just to clarify, so it's the side yard plane, so allowing a
Side yard.
flat roof instead of a pitch roof would provide more building area.
I got it.
Thank you. Yes. So a lot of it was more for, I know that, you're talking about the building footprint. So a lot of what these developers were saying is if they were given the option, if they could put in a third floor, that would give them a lot more square footage, but not necessarily giving a ton of flexibility beyond the setback adjustments for the initial building footprint. Okay, Thomas.
Sorry, I know you're trying to get to the poll. I live in Uplands neighborhood, and we have an overlay that has a height limitation. Is that voided by this, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, so Thomas, I can answer that. So it would depend on how we structured this incentive. Right now, we haven't gotten into the details, but the idea would be that we would want it to be something that could apply evenly across the city, because it gets very complicated when you have special things in different areas of the city. So it's possible that it could be an increase of 10 or 15% or whatever that percentage is in the Uplands neighborhood, for instance, over the height limitation that you all have. So the answer to that is yes, it could potentially impact that. But again, this is just a concept. We don't know what that percentage is. We don't know if we're going to move forward with that, but it's something we're considering.
All right. Thank you. That was a good discussion. All right. So if Sachi, you could administer the next poll for the 11 voting tree task force members present.
That poll should be launched. If anyone can't see it, let me know.
Yes, and I know, of course, there's a lot more details that we'll have to flesh out but for you all to feel more comfortable kind of making a decision on this. But again, there's plenty more process in this project, and this is not a final decision.
And just a reminder, only task force members can vote.
All right, we've got 10 out of our 11. Still waiting on one more person to respond, unless we had someone get up and use the restroom or step away for a moment.
To be clear, there was only one question, right?
Yes.
Correct. Okay, is there anyone still working on the poll? That's fine. If so, just raise your hand so we know to hold off. We may have lost someone. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm going to
I'd
go
say
ahead
go
and
for
end
it.
the poll.
And just Christina and Pauline as the note takers, just remember to make this out of 10 this time. All right, so it looks like 60% of six of the 10 prefer small dimensional adjustments and 40% prefer both. Because there weren't any votes for only exemption from public notice and appeals and for neither, I don't think that re-administering this vote will um, create a tiebreaker, but I was wondering if Amy or Andrew, were either of you not able to vote, or did both of you vote in this? Because we might just have to follow up with one of them.
I voted, but I wonder if there was a glitch.
I'm Andrew, did you vote?
I did.
Okay. Maybe we can just get a raise of hands from the tree task force members present if you participated in it, and we'll see if there's one person who could be the tiebreaker here, but yeah,
Looks like
somebody drop off. Somebody might have dropped off the call. Okay, well, maybe we'll reach out to them directly.
yeah, I'm only counting 10 tree task force
Me too.
members. Yeah, so we must have had someone drop off.
Okay. All right, thank you. Well, we'll move on. Thank you all for helping with that. You can put down your hands. So, all good. So moving on to the third of four of the key issues here in Code Concepts. We're on evaluating the appeals process to reduce delays and conflicts. So the current code, notice and appeals is 3 weeks for all type 2 tree removal permits. And if there is an appeal, it currently goes to the Development Review Commission and then can be further appealed to the City Council. The Development Review Commission only meets once a month, so this can often result in kind of a long process, which is costly to developers. So this alternative concept keeps the notice and appeals process, but reduces it to 2 weeks for applicants that meet the clear and objective standards, but do retain less than 50% of trees or DBH, whatever that decision is, on the lot. And if there is an appeal, it goes to the Development Review Commission or a hearings officer, which was the idea that was brought forth in the alternative approaches meeting last time that people were curious about. But it no longer can be appealed again to the city council. So we do need a decision on whether or not the appeal would go to the DRC or a hearings officer. And so here are the discussion questions that were sent to you. Does a 2-week notice and appeals process provide a good balance among community stakeholders while allowing for public input still? And if there is an appeal, should it go to the DRC or a hearings officer? And then lastly, should they still be able to appeal to City Council after, or should the decision by either the DRC or the hearings officer be the last decision in this process. So opening it up for questions and discussion. Brandon?
Yeah, I have a question for the builders in the group. Does the length of the notice affect your timeline more than waiting for the DRC meeting, or are they kind of like equal importance to you?
I'll chime in on that first. The 2-week notice does not feel too cumbersome because we're usually going through a review process through planning and then waiting for our building permits. So we're already kind of in a queue that is much longer than a 2-week process for the notification. What makes a huge difference to us is the DRC. Hearings officer, and then not having an appealable decision after a hearings officer. I think if you polled most buildings or builders, land use or land developers would agree that the most unknown, because we're trying to deal with what is known and clear and objective. The DRC to us doesn't kind of fit that bill, but I think a hearings officer has a little bit more, has a better palate. And I think that it's fair to say that a hearings officer decision, albeit final, would probably be a better scenario than a DRC having the ability to appeal it to city council and then up to LUBA. So does that answer your question at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I can second Rob on that. I would say 90% of our type 2s are usually when our plans are under review. Very few times are we going through a type 2 process as a builder when our plans are already through the city. Sometimes that does happen. So I'm still wrapping my head around the fact on whether it should continue to go to a DRC or hearings officer. My first initial thought would be a hearings officer, but I need to wrap my head a little bit more around that just because we haven't been through that process in a while.
Thank you. All right, John?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for you guys to know how many appeals were overturned by the DRC and the city council, just for a reference point. And I think, Jessica, I don't know if you've been around it longer than anyone, but since I've been on council, we've never we've accepted the DRC. We haven't reversed our decision. And I don't know if really Jeff can probably share on that DRC. I mean, I don't know if you may have sent it back to do a revision or something, maybe once, but anyway, the process is available, but it's I just want to let people know that usually it's unsuccessful on the appeal.
Yeah, John, I can answer that. We did include this information in the memo, but there's a lot of information in that memo that there have been 15 appeals in the past 5 years. And of those 15 appeals, only one decision in the last 5 years has been overturned by the council, the initial staff decision. Actually, the initial staff decision has not even been overturned by the DRC before. It only happened once, and that was city council.
Thank you. Jason?
So just so I understand, is this hearing officer, is that an existing city employee who's nominated for this task, or that's a completely new role that you have to fill?
We actually have a hearings officer on contract. So we have one because we have to have a hearings officer available for appeals of expedited land divisions. So it's something we already have under contract and we have utilized in the past, albeit not very often.
Great, thank you. Jeff, and then we'll move on to the poll.
I really think the hearings officer is the way to go. And now I haven't been on the DRC for a while, but I was there when we first got the appeals to come to the DRC. And it was always it's just too many people. It's just too hard for everybody to be happy and make a decision. And under the current code that wasn't prescriptive, it was very difficult. So just going with a hearing officer is much more efficient and a lot better. And in the time I was there, I only remember one of our decisions being overturned by the city council, and they were right.
Thank you, Jeff. Yuko?
I'll make this quick because we need to
Okay.
vote. But as a current member of the DRC, I do also agree that just having a hearings officer making the decision is the way to go instead of having, the seven of us DRC officers to be voting on tree removal.
Great. Thank you. Okay, Sachi, if you'd administer this poll for the 10 voting tree task force members present. And again,
All
if
right.
you are John or a non-voting member, you can just X out of this window.
Looks like we had one other member of the public join, and Diana, just a heads up that this poll is just for our panelists, if you're seeing it. Okay, and it looks like we have had all 10 members of the tree task force vote. If anyone on the tree task force hasn't voted, just tree task force members, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to end the poll.
Okay, so looks like there is 90% support for reducing the appeals process, the notice and appeals process by a week. And thanks to the discussion, it sounds like everyone's on board with the hearings officer, so 100% there. And then we're still split on whether or not decisions by the hearings officer, which it looks like from this poll, everyone is in favor of at the moment, should be appealable to city council. It looks about 60% are no and 40% are yes, it should still be appealable. Okay, I'm gonna do one more hand voting poll for this one since under the assumption that it would be the hearings officer, not the Development Review Commission. So if an appeal occurs, it would go to the hearings officer. And should a decision made by the hearings officer be appealable to city council? So this is not the DRC, this is a hearings officer. Raise your hand if you think that the decisions made by the hearings officer should be appealable to city council. You can raise your hand as one of the 10 tree task force members. Okay, so we have three. All right, thank you so much for participating in that. It looks like we got kicked into the no category after the decision about a hearings officer as opposed to the DRC. So thank you again for participating in that poll. I know it feels a little weird voting on things when it's still in a very very early stage, but again, these are not set in stone. Okay, so on to the last of the 4 key issues, consistency between development and non-development tree permitting. So how the code works today. Type 2 removal permits are granted if they qualify under the criteria for type 2 tree cutting permits. if it does not fall into the 5 categories that are listed in A through E. So significant trees, alterations to features or skyline, visual screens, street trees, or consist of greater than 50% of a stand of trees. So removal under type 2 permits is only allowed through the following 2 exceptions in the bullet points on the left side of the screen. And I mentioned these earlier. The first exemption is if there's inevitable damage to structure, utilities, or infrastructure. And the second exception is if a qualified arborist does an alternatives analysis and it deems that there are no other alternatives to removing this tree. So currently, and Jeff brought up this concern at one of our previous meetings, moderate risk trees don't fit into either of these exemptions, and by definition, they don't qualify under the dead, dying, and dangerous permits or emergency permits either. So this alternative concept suggests an additional third exemption to this existing list of 2 exemptions. And it would be that the applicants are given a path to removing a moderate risk tree, even when the removal will have a significant impact on the character aesthetics of a neighborhood, that require an arborist to classify the tree with a moderate overall risk rating as one qualification, and either the arborist deems that there's no alternatives through maintenance or pruning or any other solutions to reducing the risk rating of the tree to low risk, or the arborist determines that there's demonstrable history of similar tree failure in the immediate area. So this allows for flexibility, especially if this is, a neighborhood that was really affected by winter storms and has had a lot of failures in trees. So it allows for a little bit more flexibility in residents to address trees that they can prove are at moderate risk to them.
Sarah, can I add a clarifying, just something to consider?
Yeah.
So when we do the tree risk assessment process, we do not consider storms, and it's normal weather conditions. So could you clarify that a little bit more? Storm failures during storms is going to be considered as part of this or not?
No, sorry, I misspoke
Does
there.
that make sense?
So yes,
Okay.
thank you for that clarification. Yeah. All right.
But the path, the exceptions criteria does allow a consideration of failures of similar trees in the immediate area that could have been storm related. And it has to be a demonstrable history of that. So some type of documentation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so a little of both. It allows for a little potential flexibility while not doing kind of this dangerous thing that's just allowing people to remove trees because they're scared they will fall. But yeah, that's what I was trying to get at there, and thank you for clarifying. All right, so we have a few minutes for questions. Deanne?
I think it would be helpful if one of the arborists could just tell all of us like how moderate risk is determined.
Great point. Anybody want to speak to that?
Yeah, Morgan, you want to take?
Oh, Morgan could do it. That's fine.
Yeah, I think Brandon,
You wanna take that,
Christine, or
Brandon?
I could do it. In general, there's a very standardized approach to categorizing risk, and we look at the probability, the likelihood of failure. Is it unlikely? Is it possible? Is it probable? Is it imminent? And then we categorize the risk from there based on target potential. What's it going to hit? How severe are the implications of that? So in general, the high risk, the current city code, the likelihood of failure has to be probable. It's a likely, probable event that will occur. For a moderate risk, it has to be possible. So many trees will fall into that moderate risk category. For many of them, there are abatement options to get it to low. But that's why there's this added thing that, you have a moderate risk trees, but there's no alternatives. So that has to be taken into consideration. If you can abate the risk, it wouldn't qualify. But many trees will fall into that moderate category because the likelihood of failure is possible rather than probable.
I think it's important to like define possible. So I'm like looking at the book right now. Failure may be expected in extreme weather, but is unlikely during normal weather conditions within a specified time frame. And so that's why a lot of trees could potentially fall into this moderate risk that really are not expected to fail in normal weather conditions.
Great. Thank you. And Andrew, you had your hand up for a minute. Andrew Mays?
Yeah, sorry about that. I think that it's all a little species dependent with a lot of these, so I think that having this option is really valuable. Just because a lot of times it can be tree parts, whether it's the crown, the trunk, the root plate, it's not likely that or high risk that a tree is going to uproot, but sometimes, overextended limbs or limbs over structures that it's not practical to mitigate, they're still posing a risk. And lots of these trees do come up as moderate, even low sometimes, which is fine. But I think it creates a culture of, some arborists going in there and green lighting these hazard forms. So it makes it a little unethical. And I love the idea for this exemption, as well as I think Christine brought it up, tree risk assessments done with 3-year, 5-year windows, but it's under normal weather conditions. So having the history of failures in the area or the site, I think helps a lot.
Great, thank you. I'll have Jason have the last comment before we move on to the poll, since we're nearing
That's
the
okay.
end of our
I was
time here.
just lowering my hand. I think between Brandon and Andrew's and Morgan's comments, I don't have any question.
Great. Brandon?
I think that it would be important to have other criteria to consider for removal, like documentation of a history of damage to property or a history of fail. I know a history of failure was included in here, but I am concerned that including moderate risk trees for removal where there's no other issues that are affecting the property will lead to a significant increase in tree removals in the city.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So I just launched this poll for the 10 tree task force members. Again, if you are a member of the public or a council member, please refrain from voting. So just giving your first initial reaction to this code concept idea. Here we go again. Okay, so I have 7 out of the 10 now, 9 out of the 10. All right, so I have all 10 tree task force members present voted. Ending the poll here. And so it looks like 70% are in favor of allowing removal under these conditions at the moment. All right. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for just kind of jumping in and giving your first impressions of these code concepts. There will be plenty more put in front of you. And all of your comments today and questions brought up some really good points that we'll dig into more and try to come back next time with some more answers for you and some more details for you to look over. So the next steps are to bring these code concepts that you saw today to the Planning Commission on November 18th and the City Council on December 8th. So we'll report to them if this concept was generally supported by the tree task force, or kind of what the pertinent questions or concerns that were brought up were. Um, and Brandon will be attending those meetings as the chair. You are all also encouraged to join and attend as well. And then the next tree task force meeting will happen probably, it says mid-November to early December, when we were still, we were still kind of figuring out when we're going to be meeting with council and planning commission, but it will likely be kind of mid-December. All things, hoping that we don't get bumped from any agendas and everything goes as planned. So we will be sending out a doodle poll again, as we have been. So look out for that. And that will be when we report back on the stakeholder focus groups and public outreach. That was initially planned for today, but the code concepts were really important to talk about right now. And we actually have our last public outreach event this in 2 weeks, in not this weekend, but the weekend after. So we'll be able to kind of wrap up all of those findings and what everyone said and bring those back to you. And I know we're over time, so if you need to, you can drop off. But I don't know, Brandon, did you have your hand up from earlier? I'd like to get to Deanne, if you have any questions, Deanne.
I was just wondering, will you send us information on those meetings, like time, place, date?
Yes, I'll make a note of that. And Councillor Wendland?
Yeah, on the stakeholder focus groups, I think it'd be great. Will we have a written sort of recap of each of the things of each meeting?
Yes, there's going to be a memo, so that will be sent out ahead of the next tree task force meeting too. We'll have that all finalized for you and sent out to you. We just need to finish up the events. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. All right, everybody. Again, if you have any more comments or thoughts on what we talked about today, feel free to email them to us. We've been recording them and saving them in a matrix that we have of all of the comments for these meetings. If you could do that by Friday as well, so that we can analyze and synthesize the discussion today, that would be great. Okay. Thank you so much. I'll see you all soon. And thank you, Christine, for joining.